I affirm, I defend the resolution as a general principle, but I'm willing to specify further in cross-ex. Part 1 is the meta-ethic of virtue. Any kind of ethics fails unless it uses fundamental aspects of life to explain good and bad. Reader 2K. The problem of rationality of ethics, the same problem of displaying rationality of all other things, game, scientific inquiry, all we lay our hands on, is first of all, like the idea of using the world to explain our activities practically contradictory. The idea of rationality rather than first nature can explain ethics involves a similar other way we think is part of our life. It is no more noble in itself, living as we live exploratory naturalism as far as we can and need to go, and the subject of ethical thought must provide the initial ethical premise from which further ethical conclusions may be deduced. That's McIntyre 81. In a valid argument, nothing independent conclusion which is not out in the premises from the premises. The capital conclusion may be inferred that the attribute of capital not to do from factual premises such as this watch is inaccurate. The conclusion follows a bad watch. The arguments are valid because of the character of a watch. This is the only way to bridge the is not because it's not that we ought to act in a certain way because those actions are observed. Rather, we discern what a species is meant to be like through empirical observations. Thus, any judgment must be based on the inherent characteristics of Aristotelian necessities to arrive at a concept of human goodness. But O3, an Aristotelian necessity is necessary because good hangs on we invoke the same idea when we say that it is necessary. For both times impacts Aristotelian necessities depend on a particular species. Human defects and excellence is related to what human beings are and do thus these standards promoting human goodness. Additionally, prefer the standard 1 moral perception. The only way to have motivational morality is through virtue ethics because we think of ourselves as virtuous people. Moral perception is a prior question because that only virtue ethics addresses. Lindemann 05. 1 problem ethical theory spaces to determine the connection between recognition of ethical dilemmas and motivation. Acting with theoretical principles does not provide the perception necessary to recognize a specific situation. Rule-based ethics problematic as they assume ethical standards and advance neutral presupposed moral perception. The Asian moral perception is characteristic of a person as their part of how a person interacts with the world. Moral perception is closely linked to virtue as virtue shaping on agents' understanding of the moral environment. 2 state obligations. The government is obligated to promote human fulfillment of human purpose because societal institutions are created by humans as a tool for achievement of their purpose. Verse 7. The purpose of the state is the purpose of its members. All laws of institutions draw legitimacy to the subservience of the purpose. Best criterion to employ judging value of national associations, how they contribute to its members. And 3 real agents only virtue ethics avoids the harms of depersonalized and codified theories. Silva 11. Moral philosophy consistent when it tries to ground moral action on universal rules promotes abstract account that neglects vital aspects of moral life and virtue ethics characterized by real agents in contrast to damn focus on duties and consequentialist focus on results. Moral knowledge is uncodifiable approaches suffer from depersonalizing tendency. Virtue ethics tries to ground action of the real agent. Virtue ethics focus on being and not doing. Part 2 is the virtues and organ procurement. The 3 main virtues justify organ procurement as virtuous. So point A is phronesis, wisdom. Phronesis allows for full virtue by using rational choice to balance virtue terms. That's Hurst House 13. 1 can fall short of full virtue by lacking phronesis wisdom. Virtue is something that makes the possessor good. We may say if someone he or she is too generous or is honest to a fault to tell a lie they should not have told. To prevent someone else's hurt feelings, to ready acceptance permits a wide-ranging application of many virtue terms. Virtuous agent is motivated by inclination, not by rational choice. And virtue awaits deferred action by phronesis, and that controls the internal link to deontic theories. Hurst House 2. Good intentions are to do the right thing. Wisdom enables the possessor to do just that. Deontologist stress action guiding rules cannot be applied without wisdom. Correct application requires situational appreciation. And organ donation enacts phronesis by practicing actions that express our beliefs and secure benefits. Voice 1. The belief without action is merely a psychological state. Organ donation and phronesis, which links virtue to being and acting within a community, and they will develop skill practices to a form of mastery. Virtue association makes demonstrates being able to secure real benefits from situations. And so point B is arete, excellence. Arete calls upon virtue by striving for excellence through action. That's voice 2. Arete is associated virtue as consistent striving for excellence. Performative repetition of acts associated virtue creates virtue within the individual. Virtue is consistent constituent of all actions that aim to be exemplars in their specific field. And organ donation achieves arete by constantly striving for optimal procedures. That's voice 3. Arete can be conceived can be conceived by the donor. One could ask what constitutes virtue in organ donation or other procedures optimally designed survival. The organ recipient is the evaluative sign of excellence and goodness, and virtue are achieved through constant striving. So point C is eudaimonia, flourishing. Organ donation allows the donor to achieve eudaimonia, positive virtue, by enacting a response to moral merit. Voice 4. Eudaimonia is a positive flourishing, and virtue and eudaimonia are intertwined without happiness being attached to virtues, and the person in need of organ donation are the real requiring virtuous response to provide the opportunity for the eudaimonia to enact virtuous behavior as well as the consequence of basic needs met. Organ donation constitutes real well-being within the world as well as the well-being of the recipient. And part 3 is the benefits of presumed consent. Presumed consent constructs the circumstances necessary for the expression of virtue. Voice 5. Conceptual tools that achieve virtue were desired were not hindrances to virtues. The struggle for virtue was good in itself. Opt-out organ donation scheme to aid the individual in the group towards a state of virtue could be regarded as negative self-referential. People indicate support to donate, not translate to actual registrations of virtues, indicate their willingness to donate. Some are virtuous yet do nothing. And presumed consent does not undermine virtue of people who positively donate. That's voice 6. Opt-out presents a specific challenge. It is in the nature of virtues. People recognize practical wisdom and engage in a constant striving. And their arguments regarding virtue as being allowed for the individual not to act and retain virtue. For a voluntary virtue suggests that organ donation would be one of donation regardless of the scheme, or those virtues of character. The nature of the scheme has no impact on their decision. And presumed consent increases organ donation by 21 to 26% in comparison to informed consent. Silva et al. 07. Results clarify benefits of presumed consent, which has a positive effect of 21 to 26% on donation related to informed consent. The methodology was able to provide evidence against the common belief that presumed consent has a positive effect only because of the Spanish donation rate, and for further study because a large sample size. Silva et al. 2. Our paper has the advantage of a large sample, which includes Latin countries and other countries with low organ donation. We can verify whether there's a positive relationship when we analyze more heterogeneous sample, and B, improved quantile regression that better controls for outliers. That's Silva et al. 3. A new method of quantile regression combines panel data with a focus on the response variable distribution. This works better with outliers. The main goal is to analyze the rates over 5 years, and C, the study is an evaluation over 5 years rather than a single snapshot in time. So it does a better job accounting for differences in circumstances across countries. And D, the study controls for variables such as traffic accidents, brain death, GDP, and health expenditure. And E, the data come from a reputable international organization such as World Health Organization and World Bank, and empirically verified by multiple countries. That's Wilcox 03. Donation increased in France and Belgium after the implementation of presumed consent in Belgium. Overall donation increased 183%. Austria has the highest rate of cadaver donors in Singapore. The number of kidneys has increased approximately 5 to 31 per year. And AF gets RVIs because A, theory is a no-risk issue for the net killing fairness. B, RVIs check abusive theory proliferation. The AF becomes susceptible to infinite interpretations with no recourse. C, 6-minute NR means that the net can go for theory, and substitute which always proves the 2A are no way to have equitable access to the ballot. And D, NC is reactive, so they can pick a strategy that meets the AF theory's laziness and not a check on abuse. RVIs are the only way to check back the advantage they garner from creating another no-risk layer. Process.
What's quantile regression?
Quantile regression is the method that they use. I don't actually know how it works.
Okay. So let's talk about...
But it talks about how that's the best way of getting rid of outliers.
Okay, so Boyce 5, this says that an opt-out scheme is a struggle for virtue, which your evidence says is a good in and of itself.
Yeah.
So do you get offense from the aim of presumed consent as opposed to its implementation?
No, not necessarily from the aim, but there are a few ways. So the part 2 is the one that delineates what counts as offense and not. So
wait, what counts as offense? I'm asking you specifically in terms of aims versus implementation, because your evidence says the struggle for virtue is good in and of itself. So if I show that presumed consent is bad at increasing organ donation, do we still affirm because PC struggles towards virtue?
Right, that's what I'm trying to explain. So the B point in part 2, which talks about arete, would be turned by that argument that you just explained, right? Because that talks about working and striving towards optimal organ procedures. The subpoint A about phrenesis could still apply under that term because it talks about how individuals...
I don't think that answers my question. So let's say I read a counterplan that also strives for virtue. What happens? Presumption?
No, that's fine.
The both of us are striving for virtue?
You can turn it with that, yes. But
so efficacy comes first. It comes before just the mere striving for virtue.
It's not a simple question of maximizing organs is what I'm trying to explain. So if you read something like a conscription counterplan, there are arguments in part 2 that talk about how that is not exactly a virtuous type of donation.
Okay,
that would not link to our phrenesis, and that would not be...
Silva 11, you say virtue ethics avoids depersonalized and codified theories. What's the impact?
So it talks about how it would allow for the agency of individuals.
Okay, what's the impact?
Right. So the argument is that we can't have abstract accounts because then we can't really understand the ethics of the individual, because it's the only way that you can understand true ethics is by knowing the individual.
Okay, so you say AF gets RVIs. Under what conditions do you get the RVI? Do you get an RVI on an I need? Do you have to win comparative offense to a counter-interpretation?
I'll say I get the RVI if I win offense to a counter-interpretation.
Does the negative get an RVI?
I don't take a stance on that. I justify that I get an RVI. I don't justify that you do or do not.
Will you give me an RVI if I don't read theory in the NC?
If you don't read theory? No.
Yeah. If you read 1AR theory.
Here, listen. I read that I get an RVI. If you want an RVI, you read that you get an RVI. That's the most reciprocal interpretation.
Okay, so let's talk about this McIntyre 81 evidence. This gives the example of factual premises about a watch. How would that example apply to factual premises about a human being? How do we determine what's essential to a human being?
Well, I would say that's contextualized by the second part of the AF, which talks about what specific virtues a human would want to pursue. You can definitely link into other
so
virtues. People
that don't donate their organs are not humans?
No, but it's that in order to be a good human, you should be donating your organs, right? So my argument is not that a non-functional watch is not a watch, but that a functional watch would be a good watch.
Okay, so do you defend an on-balance interpretation of the resolution?
I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that.
Do you defend that in a majority of just societies, PC is good?
Sure.
Okay. I'll take pro. Do you defend family veto?
Can we move this?
Yeah, sure. Do you defend family veto?
No.
Okay. Excuse me. Okay, 4 minutes. So the order is NC Wanna case. It's called Preetham Virtues Like. Could you just move it from here?
Yes.
Actually, you're fine.
Here, let me get this. Cool. Let me just open up your flash drive.
Yeah, I'll actually move it over here.
Okay, Preetham Virtues.
Yep, so NC one-off case. Is everybody good? Alright, cool. Action theory precedes ethics and skip 58. That I owe the grocer a sum would be one fact which would be prudent relation I am in Bilker in present day philosophy. An explanation is required how an unjust man is a bad man or an unjust action a bad one. Ethics cannot be begun until we are equipped with sound philosophy, psychology. We need to account at least what a human action is, and all and how its description is affected by intention and the volitional nature of agency mandates the reason the universalized other person's course guard 6. If the self is constituted by volition, it cannot exist in advanced volition. When I will go to the dentist, I cannot be willing that my future self should go, for whether I have a future self depends on that law. If not, that my body is a wanton without a self, any maxim must universalize over more than my present self. Perhaps it is only all the future subjects of my body, but we need some reason why only that should be relevant. I must interact with the future subjects of my body, but of course I must interact with other agents as well. So I must will universally and publicly. I cannot coherently regard my reasons as applying merely to myself. Thus the standard is respecting others as ends. I contend presumed consent treats humans as mere means, denies their capacity to reason. Bailey 12. Presumed consent would change organ donation based on compassion into the state, intruding on one of the most personal and delicate moments of family's life. Humans should be seen as ends of themselves. Any society that respects autonomy should not view bodies public property purely by default. We should be allowed to exercise a reason and decide for ourselves whether our deceased body can be used by someone else. And turns VAC studies proved informed consent is key to healthcare. Cap 89. Recent research on the relationship between a sense of control over one's life and positive outcomes and aging. Such data show that the extent to which individuals control their lives and health may be a major determinant of satisfaction and well-being. Sorry, the chief legal mechanism of empowerment health is the doctrine of informed consent. Next stop is Counterplan. Counterplan, the United States should repeal the prohibition in the National Organ Transplant Act of 1984. Counterplan solves shortages, economic models, crude beard, and LA. The solution is simple: repeal NOTA and allow cadaveric organs to rise to equilibrium prices. There appears to be excess capacity. We are harvesting only about half of the potential of cadaveric donors, therefore the price elasticity of supply is likely to be quite large and the market clearing price low. There doesn't appear to be a sufficiently large supply of cadaveric donors to resolve the shortage fully. To continue to postpone the only effective solution in the hope of resolving the shortage at a zero price to condemn thousands more patients to death. The results should serve as a wake-up call for those who continue tinkering with the procurement system. And the Counterplan is better than the app. Only my evidence is comparative good win 6. Unlike presumed consent, a marketing cadaveric organs values individual liberty to refuse organ harvesting. We must confront the uncomfortable realities about altruistic organ procurement. An organ market would provide an incentive for suppliers to participate in saving lives, and the plan creates a ruse of solvency which dooms the current bearded LA. The transplant industry has adopted a series of policy options. I'll continue the zero-price altruistic system. These marshalless policies represent an intentional illusory response to this policies create the illusion serious efforts being made while postponing more effective performance, and the Counterplan is mutually exclusive anyway. Presumed consent denies legal rights to organs. Kirsten 8. The meaning of presumed consent may be an inaccurate and misleading term. Presumption of consent cannot be taken as donor willingness, but rather as a presumption of state rights to post-mortem body organs. It also takes away the power to give that donorship confers. And presumed consent is advocated, hence liberty of the state to assume the rights to decide about further usage case. Overview to the framework. State action is incompatible with virtue. Jewel 89. Only individuals can have values, not collectivities. Collective efforts to secure virtue would constitute contradiction in terms of virtuous actions were willed for their own sake by the agent, even if the state cannot coercively direct behavior. There would still be no virtue because the missing intentional component conservatives cannot create productive lifestyles and wars on drugs and pornography anymore. The liberals can create compassion by redistribution, and this takes out the Gerson evidence. The Gerson evidence just says that the state has to act for the purpose of its members, but my evidence directly answers this and says even if the state could not coercively direct behavior, there would still be no virtue because of the missing intentional component. Even Gerson himself says that states lack intentions, which means that the state itself cannot be the one that possesses virtue, even if it is directing its members, and this means prefer Dayon. Only Dayon can explain why to escape the state of nature course guard aid. The only restriction on freedom is consistency with the freedom of everyone else. Violations of justice may be opposed by coercion for the reason that anything that hinders the freedom is consistent with freedom. It follows the rights are coercively enforceable. This is the foundation of the political state. When each person enforces his own rights, the result is social disorder. Since disorder is contrary to our interests, people join together into a political state, and state-specific obligations come first. It's most contextual to the resolution. We need to analyze fundamental aspects of the state, not human life generally, to be germane to the app. That means that the reader 2K evidence goes neg, and virtue ethics defaults today on practical first. Practical reason comes first under virtue ethics. It unifies the telos. Can't be on 11. For Aristotle, one of the traits that distinguishes human beings is reasoning. He identified practical reasoning as the highest virtue for Nisus guidation, and the proper use of virtue. Practical reason remains extremely important in virtue ethics as it discerns the features of the situation and divides these with the tailors derived action. This means even if he wins virtue ethics, the MC turns the AC, and I will win why his argument that affirming key to phronesis is just false, and devolves to Dayon virtues are just principles. Course card 14. Foot is granting that what makes an agent well-functioning is his principles, but then why talk about the virtues if virtue is just a third personal name to certain principles? Surely the principles or philosophy should be concerned with how can justice make a good act on certain reasons. The idea that acting on principles counts as virtuous is, you know, theoretical work, and NC turns the AC freedoms of virtue, Yank 12. Flourishing is a community requires having content space to be master of one's own life. Aristotle rejects Plato's arguments that citizens of virtue wealth to raise the boundaries between them. The ability to favor those boundaries must be meaningful to each individual or important parts of flourishing. He says virtue ethics is key to motivation, but practical reason solves its internally motivational course guard 2. I would not say the account more motivationally works, but assume that people are rational. Rather, there's a descriptive sense in which people have no choice but to be rational. Rationality is more spontaneous than the fact that we self-conscious beings and connect our incentives we take them to be reasons. I'm not making a strong presupposition. Rationality in the normal sense is more a thesis of moral psychology. I already answered Gerson 7, but on the third argument, he says that we need to reject decentered moral theories. But one, his argument devolves to individualism, U89. If freedom and individualism are abandoned, then we are not speaking in true communities. There's mutuality only when persons freely associate under agreeable terms. Human nature is defined by choice. Respect for persons, show my grounding communities, individual choice, and rights trump the social good, even if we're connected and not decentered. Course guard 89. A person's burden cannot be away by benefits of others, even if the benefits are far greater. Efforts we make for those who we love are not regarded as uncompensated burdens, so perhaps it would be alright to impose a burden on me in order to benefit my friends. But the argument against paternalism bears against this conclusion. Even when a burden is imposed on a person from which she or herself will benefit, compensation by itself does not do justifytory work. That I will be compensated may give me a reason to accept a burden. It does not give you a reason to impose one on me. Now on the array day contention. Array day is... Wait, I'm going to scroll down. Let's see. Array day can't guide action. Aristotle tried avoiding this problem through phronesis or practical wisdom, so virtue ethics devolves practical reason for decay. Reason achieves array day when it serves as a guide to the mean. Aristotle defended moderation by saying these virtues are good in themselves and be taken to extremes. This implies that moderation is not always best. How do we know in advance which actions are virtuous and should not be done in moderation when virtuous behavior is defined as moderate? Neither he nor anyone can determine ethical behavior by asking whether an action is mean. Aristotle addressed this point through phronesis. Also, he says that phronesis controls the internal into deontic theories, but his offense to phronesis does not control the internal into bystander, which is respecting others as ends, whereas his voice, what evidence, just as the organ donation ensures well-developed skills and ensures that we can secure real benefits from situations, but has absolutely nothing to do with respecting others as ends, which means that virtue ethics does devolve to practical reason. At best, he only has offense to practical reason, but my course guard 6 evidence says that practical reason would entail universalizability, which means if he doesn't have offense under universalizability or respecting others as ends, then he cannot possibly turn the day onto theory that I have established. Then on eudaimonia, I already answered this with the Yank 12 evidence that freedom is a prerequisite to flourishing. Also, he doesn't solve shortages. A meta-analysis of 13 studies concludes presumed consent does not increase donation rates of Rebuttal at 9. 8 databases were searched to locate studies on presumed consent. Internet searches were also performed. The quality of the surveys was assessed. 13 studies met the inclusion criteria. These studies compared data from different countries. The study's success impact of factors other than presumed consent of organ donation. The conclusion: presumed consent is unlikely to explain organ donation rate. A combination of legislation, availability of donors, infrastructure, wealth, investment, underlying public attitudes all play a role. It cannot be inferred that presumed consent leads to an increase in donation. It is not possible to rule out other factors. Prefer my evidence. A, it's a meta-analysis. His is not. 2, my evidence accounts for all causes. His does not. Accounting for all causes is key to ensure that there's actually correlated, to ensure there's actually causation, not simply correlation. 3, even if you have reputable international organizations, that is an appeal to authority, whereas you always, at best, if you do look to experts, you prefer a meta-analysis because that accounts for a much larger totality of experts. So presumed consent does not increase organ supply, which also means he doesn't access his virtues offense, which is predicated on efficacy. Process.
Status of the counterplan?
Unconditional.
Unconditional, awesome.
And since net benefit, that's a good win 6 evidence. Counterplan respects liberty.
Okay. Is the NC only offense under the AF framework, or is it also offense under the NC?
I have my own framework. The Anston 58 evidence says that action theory precedes ethics.
No, is the counterplan only offense under the AF, or is it offense under the NC?
The counterplan matters under both because the counterplan respects individual liberty, and it also solves the
Why is that offense for you? That seems like a defensive argument.
Well, it's my advocacy. It respects liberty. You don't.
Okay, and you only do that within the context of the AF, right?
Wait, what?
You only repeal this legislation only exists in the AF, right? It only exists in the United States, right?
Yeah.
So, what do you do for countries outside of the United States?
Well, even if not for countries outside the United States, it still respects liberty and increases organ supply. Right? Also,
so
the way
it only increases organ supply within the United States?
Sure, but that still has some sort of impact on virtue.
Okay.
Right? There are still going to be millions of people in the United States.
And the competition is just denial of rights, right?
No, the competition is the mutual exclusivity argument. That's Pearsonic aid. Yeah, that's a denial of rights argument. That presumed consent means that individuals would no longer have legal control over their bodies.
Yeah, I understand. So that's the competition argument.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So let's talk about the offense under the NC. So is the argument simply that we lose our rights to the state?
That's the argument, that our ability to reason is denied because it takes the decision out of our hands.
Why does it do that?
The Bailey 12 evidence says that if we view bodies as
public
property by default, because our bodies are viewed as public property by default, that the state has the right to do what it wants with our bodies, just as a default rule. But that takes it out of our hands to reason about the situation.
Okay, so you say that that the Course Guard 8 evidence says that damage is best under state action. How do we evaluate impacts from that standpoint?
From the standpoint
of
of
the state.
The state should be deontological. That's the Course Guard 8 evidence. I have offense under deontology. So.
Okay, so your argument seems to be rather the offense under the NC seems to just be that we should have less violations of rights. Is it compared in that sense, or is it that we should have a non-interference model?
We should respect others as ends. I don't take a stance on the non-interference model, the respect for wishes model.
Okay, what does a turn look like under the NC?
That's up to you. You have to argue why presumed consent respects others as ends.
Okay, so respecting someone as an end is sufficient to turn the NC?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So let's talk about each card in the counterplan quickly.
Sure.
So you say that your counterplan solves shortages. What economic models do you use for that?
The Beard et al. 8 evidence looks at price elasticity, and it shows that people would have an economic incentive to sell their organs after death. The National Organ Transplant Act of 1984 prohibits the ability to sell your organs after you die.
Okay, I got it. So what would that look like?
It would mean that you
would. What if you want to change your mind?
Well, I guess you could call off the deal that you've made with someone. You would say, I'm willing for you to take my organs when I die if you pay me or if you pay my heirs.
Awesome. Very impressive. See the methodology for your Rebuttal evidence?
It's all in the minimized text. It's like AT shortages.
Yeah, I'll get there. Your Bramhall 11 evidence says it costs.
I didn't read that.
Okay, that's the one that you didn't read.
Yeah, I also didn't read Chile.
Okay.
I can delete everything I didn't read.
That's fine. You didn't read this stuff, did you?
No, I didn't read the Jesus.
Okay, actually, yeah. There's stuff that I'm confused about then. Can you just quickly delete that?
Yeah.
Last crap for a second.
Okay.
Also, you said you didn't read the proofs. Okay, you read the rest of it? Okay, perfect. Starting prep. order is NC, Counterplan, AC.
Can you flash me whatever you're reading?
Yeah. There you go. Do
you want my stem?
Yeah, that'd be nice. Just wait a second.
Okay.
So that I can, I'll just call it for Tomasi.
Okay. Awesome. Here you go. Okay, I'm ready to go.
Okay. Actually, the order will start on the AT autonomy stuff, and then it'll go to the top stuff.
Awesome.
Okay, sorry, I messed that up.
Wait, I'm sorry, one more time.
NC, Counterplan, AC. Is everyone ready?
Yeah.
Extend his horsepower evidence that the only way that we can evaluate impacts is through factual reason. Now going to the contention first. There are less mistakes of violations of autonomy under presumed consent. There's best Taylor 06. Person who does not want to donate is more likely to opt out under presumed consent than a person who does not want to donate under opt in under the current system. A person is likely to post for moral, prudential, or religious reason. The person who wishes to donate would be less motivated, registered desire. It is less likely that fewer mistakes will be made in presumed consent, and public surveys confirm that the majority are willing to donate their organs as IOM 06. The arguments based on autonomy support presumed consent. The majority in public surveys indicate that they'll be willing to donate their organs, and explicit consent policies impose the cost of switching the majority. The presumed consent model would enable the majority to do what they want. Presumption in favor of organ donations more likely to realize the autonomy of the deceased person. Then presumption against and prefer quantitative weighing of violations of autonomy because violations are equal under a paradigm of respect for which is Taylor 06, where mistaken removal of organs is only equivalent to a mistaken non-removal. It would not be reasonable to use non-interference model. A complete non-interference is impractical. We would simply leave the bodies where they fell, and we would use respect for which is model. Each mistake is on par. We ought to implement government procurement to result for fewer mistakes. And a point to further this is the office on the counterplan is also contingent on this kind of model. It says that we should have the ability to sell our own organs. That is not a non-interference type of model. And B point, he talks about state action, which means that we would have to be able to weigh between violations. The fact that we would always have a non-interference model means that the government can never take any action. So the justifications he's reading on the AC mandate this type of model. And second, familial consent undermines autonomy. That's Cook 07 self-determination of the individuals will be destroyed if the deceased donor's gift is rejected because lack of consent is the descendant's next of kin. A family member demand improperly trumps what should be an autonomous decision is unethical to allow the next of kin decision to take precedence over the fate of their own body. Now his cap evidence says that it would be a violation of the autonomy of the family, but there's no reason why the family has the rights over the individual. The Cook 07 evidence outweighs because his arguments that we should universalize our own freedoms, which means that we should all have the ability to express our own beliefs, and presumed consent removes the next of kin from decision-making process. That's Gerson is not 87. Presumed consent would make the donor the primary and exclusive decision maker by removing the next of kin from decision-making. Presumed consent would better reflect popular support. And 3, the ability to opt out, even if difficult, maintains respect for autonomy. Hughes 09. Those who do not opt out voluntarily consent to harvesting. People may be autonomously choose to act when the alternative is distasteful, difficult, or dangerous. It is a mistake to suppose that people, even in a highly constrained circumstance, people cannot act autonomously and give voluntary consent. He says that it's a violation of autonomy because we lose our rights to the state. But my argument is that we maintain our rights as long as we have the ability to opt out, which the Hughes 09 evidence answers. And 4, there's no harm to autonomy because a person is never his or her own corpse. That's Hirschnoff and Dylan A. 09. We don't think there are good metaphysical reasons for believing that any of us will ever be corpse if persons are essentially then we cease to exist when the capacities for thought are destroyed. If we are essentially organisms and contingently persons, then we should essentially be alive, and thus the corpse is not our body but rather remains in our own body. If none of us ever will become a corpse, our autonomy cannot be violated because organs from our corpse, our living body is not the later corpse, or our corpse is not being mutilated. Now going to the counterclaim. He does not contextualize in 1 and C why the counterclaim is offense under the 1 and C, but in case he goes for it, but he still has to win it because it's unconditional, which means that if he's losing it, he'd lose the flow. The first thing against it, the first problem with it is that I specify any just society, but the scope of the counterplan is only the United States, which means that there's a marginal net benefit to the counterplan at worst, which means that you should be defaulting affirmative in this round. And second, you confirm to both. You can say that we have the ability to sell our organs after death, but if they don't make it clear that they want to sell their organs after death, then we would presume that we take their organs. There's no reason that it's mutually exclusive with the advocacy and off of the organ shortage arguments. The top of the document now. Futures markets fail due to low worth of organs and lack of motivation for interest. That's IOM 06. Chance of dying in the appropriate circumstance or low death may occur in the far future. Therefore, the right to potential organs is not worth nearly as much as the actual organ at time of death. It seems unlikely that there would be enough investors to allow for a futures market to develop, given the long time required and uncertainty about the profits. And finally, you confirm if I'm winning the offense on the NC, that proves that there's no competition because the competition in P, conceits, and cross-six is premised on the offense to the NC and denying organs. Now go to the solvency debate at the very bottom of the AC in case he tries to leverage that. First, Australia evidence in the he says that it's meta-analysis that's problematic because we don't need to know the methodology that he uses to exclude studies. He chooses these studies randomly, and his evidence does not talk about how they use that. And second, for fraud scope, he does not talk about where the 13 studies might come from a multitude of countries, including Latin America, which means that it's the most reliable analysis.
Okay, I have like 4 minutes left to prep.
I didn't read the second card, okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so the order is, it's going to be Counterplan, and then the NC, and I'll flash this up to you now. 2NR for P dot.
That sounds more like I was surprised at the first one.
Alright, ready?
Counterplan NC.
Yup. Everyone good? I'll defend the counterplan, but there's no disadvantage to it under my framework. There's also no net benefit to the perm, because the only net benefit to the perm is that the plan is key to increasing organ supply, but increasing organ supply is irrelevant under the NC framework because it is a consequential concern, which means that even if I'll defend it as an unconditional advocacy, my framework would be morally neutral on the question of that advocacy, because there's no disadvantage to it under Kantianism, but there's also no benefit to it under Kantianism, which means you would just vote neg on the NC, because the NC is a reason to vote neg on the counterplan, because as long as the counterplan is not presumed consent, then if I show that presumed consent is bad for liberty, then that is a reason to prefer the counterplan under my framework, and there's no net benefit to doing the perm under my framework. But also, the perm does not make sense. He's conceded the Pearson negate evidence that presumed consent denies the legal right to have any control over your body, which means that would make organ sales impossible, because with organ sales after your death, you would have to have some control over your body to have the freedom to decide whether you want to buy or sell. But even under my framework, the counterplan would be beneficial, because the Goodwin 6 evidence that the counterplan is key to liberty. If I win the presumed consent is not, then that is a comparative advantage to the counterplan. But even if he beats you back Goodwin 6, at best that would just mean the counterplan would be morally neutral under my framework. But also the perm doesn't make sense because it is time frame severance. We assume that the app happens immediately. He's saying that we do the counterplan and then the app, but that's just nonsensical. Also, we don't even know how it would be implemented. He says that we should allow people to sell their organs, but if they don't want to sell their organs, then we would do presumed consent. So we have no idea how that system could possibly be implemented, where the state would be able to say, if you don't want to sell your organs, we'll just put you on an opt-out registry. That clearly doesn't make sense. We would have no idea how that's implemented. He's also not reading any evidence for the perm. On the IOM 6 evidence, he says that there are uncertainties as to how the futures market might be implemented, but the Bearded L8 evidence says the economic models prove that the counterplan solves, since organs will eventually be raised to equilibrium prices. His IOM 6 evidence says that it's unclear whether people would be willing to pay for these organs that would be sold, but the Bearded L8 evidence says that the counterplan would result in these organs being raised to equilibrium prices. Equilibrium in economic theory is a question of how high or how low a price is for people to be willing or unwilling to pay for something, since the counterplan puts organ prices at an equilibrium where people would actually be willing to pay for it, and that supply and demand would be able to coalesce with each other well. That means that the futures market would be able to be successful. But at best, even if he wins the futures market's uncertain, the counterplan still respects liberty. His IOM 6 evidence is just a reason why the counterplan would not increase organ supply. Now the NC. Let's see. So, go to his turns. He says opting out solves autonomy. One, that's irrelevant to my contention. Failure to say no doesn't mean yes. So presuming a yes for them still denies their agency too. This logic makes no sense in any other context. If I ask to stab you and you don't respond, that doesn't mean you consented to it. 3, doesn't link to the framework. If they haven't expressed consent, that they haven't willed agreement. 4, only informed consent counts, not the ability to opt out. Capity 9. Knowledge creates power, hence the right to make choices acquires meaning only if accompanied by information both about rights and factual ramifications. As Metagap insurance teaches, the right to choose should not be confused with the right to be ripped off. He says respect for wishes model 1. Consent rate polls don't prove people would allow presumed consent. Even if I say I'm willing to give you money, that doesn't mean I consent to you taking it from my wallet. 2, wishes don't count as consent because they're not an expression of the will. Ripsy 9. The account I offer rests on the distinction central to all concepts of right between wishing and choosing. Your wishes do not need to form a consistent set because you don't have to do anything about them. The fact that I want something very badly is not sufficient to have chosen it. I might be tempted by the toy in the shop window, but choose to resist the temptation. 3, only informed consent counts. Information is a side constraint. Capity 9. Knowledge creates power, hence the right to make choices requires meaning only if accompanied by information both about rights and factual ramifications. As Metagap insurance teaches, the right to choose should not be confused with the right to be ripped off. And consent rates are way lower in the rest of the world. Hinkfuss at L6. There are many issues addressing organ transplantation in developing countries. Rate of transplants is lower than developed countries. Religion also plays a crucial role for some cultures. It's hard to accept a love is dead. That remains another crucial factor. In the past 10 years, the donation rates have fallen. He says that there's no harm to the donor because you are not part of your corpse. 1, I don't need to win any external harm. Consent does not depend on mutual advantage. Or C9. Granting permission might be thought to require no acceptance since the permission seems to be an advantage. This is misleading because concepts of right never deal in advantage. Suppose we are having dinner and I reach for the check. Having your dinner paid for is an incontrovertible benefit. Nonetheless, you are entitled to reject my offer. My offer entitles you to choose whether to unite your will with mine on whatever grounds you choose. And autonomy pre-death is what matters. It's a question of the choices that you make before you die, which means that even if dead people don't have autonomy in a relevant sense in terms of connection with their course, what matters is the autonomy you have whether you are connected with your course. Also, he says family veto is bad, but family veto is actually key under my framework since families are still members of the rational community. Diocese leads no date. A Kantian might think it possible to prolong the life of a particular patient due to lost rationality once the brain has stopped functioning capacity for rationality cease to exist, hence organs can be extracted. This can be sanctioned because of prior consent to the patient, since before brain death the patient was rational or through relatives at the time of brain death, since they as rational members of the moral community can act on behalf of their loved ones. He says the universalizability means we only care about our freedom, and that is a fundamental misinterpretation of universalizability. The Course Guard 6.7 says the reasons have to be public and accessible to everybody. That includes your family members who are also rational members of the moral community, which means that if you will your own freedom, you also will the freedom of family members as well. Also, my evidence agrees with this evidence that once you're brain dead, you don't have a direct connection to your corpse. But my evidence says that even if he's correct about what it means to be connected with your corpse, that at best the impact is that organ transplantation can only be justified based on either presumed prior consent or family consent, not presumed consent, which means his argument about corpses actually negates. Extend the Bailey 12 evidence in the contention that presumed consent would mean that the state would be able to control your body as public property by default. Remember the Pearson 6 evidence on the counterplan also justifies this as well. It defines presumed consent as the state having a control over your body that denies the ability of any individual to use their rational will. This outweighs all other autonomy arguments, since autonomy is not based on your wishes, it is based on the rational will. Presumed consent would undermine the ability to use your rational will, since you would not be able to reason about how your body operates. Also, rational will comes before respect for wishes. You might have a wish that is expressed in an instinctual desire, but Kant says that we have to call our instinctual desires into question and instead use the rational will to decide which of our wishes would actually be morally relevant, which means the ability to reason necessarily comes first. Quickly go back in the counterplan. He conceded the Bearded Owl 8 evidence that says that the perm is a ruse of solvency, so you should reject the perm even if he tries to go for the perm argument in the 2AR. So you clearly vote in the NC.
Charges resolution, so every time I take it off, it just stops charging and it doesn't work.
I don't need your stand. Okay?
Oh, yeah.
Is everyone ready?
Yeah.
The order is just on the NC. I mean, I'll give a quick overview that will explain why the counterplan doesn't matter, but you can just vote that on the NC. Okay? Ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Counterplan doesn't matter, he's only extending it as a reason that the fact that it's unconditional means that he doesn't lose, he's not actually extending the substantive offense as to why it's better for freedom to just go on to the NC. First, you can extend the Taylor 06 evidence that there's less violations of autonomy because most people want their organs to be donated, and you can extend the IOM 6 evidence that these surveys confirm this. Now his evidence, he says that the rates are lower in the rest of the world, but he talks about the rates of donation. His evidence is not about the rates of consent and how many people actually want to donate, which means that there's a distinction you provide on this question. So I am winning the internal link to who actually wants them to be donated. Now you can extend the Taylor 06 evidence, the next one, that you prefer qualitative evaluation of consent. Now he says that doesn't make sense in any other context because you wouldn't ask someone before you evaluate them, but in the context of this resolution we need to have a presumption because we need to know whether you take or do not take the respect for wishes model. It does not make any sense, but he's also conceding the A and B point that I say as to why you prefer. The A point is that his counterplan offense about how you would want to allow people to sell their own organs is premised on that, so it's inconsistent for him to read this argument in the 2 you should on face reject. The B point is that you have to talk about governmental action, so it's impossible to have governmental actions if you only have a non-interference model. They should do something that respects the will of the majority of people. Now his RIP-C9 evidence says that wishes don't count as consent, but it's not necessarily an issue of consent, but it's that that autonomy means that you would want to maximize that people get what they want. That is the way this framework is constructed. That the maximization of the will is that if someone wants something, then we should give them. And it's also a violation of autonomy to not give someone what they wanted. That's what the Taylor 06, the first Taylor 06 evidence is saying, which means that I control the unique offense on that weighs all of his options because his arguments are all premised on non-violations of will. So that's sufficient for you to vote F off of it. But now go to the family consent argument. He says that the family is an essential part of the community, but my argument is not that the family is not an essential part, but that the family is that the family gets outweighed by the individual because the only thing that you can universalize is that the individual chooses their own entity. The problem with his interpretation is that if the family conflicts with the individual, we don't know what to take. So that's a non-universalizable maxim. The only thing that we can universalize is that the individual determines what happens to that person, which is also the way that his framework is constructed. You want to see now go onto the Hughes 3 evidence that opt-out maintains autonomy. If I'm winning this argument, that means that there's terminal defense on his arguments. The first argument that he says is that this is not a relevant concern, not relevant concern to because not saying no doesn't mean yes, but that just begs the question of the interpretation with Taylor, whether you not want less violations or non-interference. But also opt-out maintains autonomy because the individual can choose not to be a part of the system, which means that it is at least sufficient defense on his end. Now go on to the final argument. The final argument is especially important. It says that there is no harm to an individual if because they have no connection to their body. His argument is that we still have autonomy in relation to our dead body. But my argument is that if you can no longer be that body, you can't will the autonomy in order to be that person. For example, if I am never Adam Tomasi, I can't will that Adam does something. Then if that doesn't happen, then that would be a violation of my autonomy. It's inconsistent for us to say that for us to universalize any type of maxim like that, which outweighs all of his offense. If I'm winning any of these 4 arguments, that's sufficient for you to vote F. Good round.
Are you Adam Tomasi?
I'm not.